Dad said, "Your sister's wedding will be perfect. When's your turn?" I replied, "It already happened." The champagne flute in his hand tilted, golden liquid splashing across his custom Italian suit. The string quartet's melody seemed to freeze mid-note as 300 guests turned to stare at us standing near the dessert table at my sister Victoria's $200,000 reception. My mother's hand flew to her pearl necklace, her face draining of color beneath expertly applied makeup. "What did you just say?" Her voice came out as a strangled whisper. But in the sudden silence of the Lakeside Country Club ballroom, everyone heard it perfectly. Victoria, resplendent in her custom Vera Wang gown, stopped mid-conversation with her bridesmaids, her practiced smile freezing into something ugly. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone, swiping to a photo from 3 months ago. David and me at the courthouse, my simple white dress against his navy suit, both of us grinning like idiots with our marriage license held between us. I turned the screen toward my parents with the same serene smile I'd worn through years of being the forgotten daughter. David and I got married in February. Small ceremony. Just us and 2 witnesses. Very intimate. My father's face transformed from shock to a dangerous shade of crimson. "This is Victoria's day. How dare you try to steal her spotlight with your ridiculous lies?" But his eyes were locked on the photo, on the official stamp visible even from where he stood, on the undeniable proof that his disappointment of a daughter had done something significant without his permission or knowledge or money. "It's not a lie, Dad. We've been married for 3 months. I glanced at David, who stood near the bar, watching with that calm engineer's assessment he brought to complex problems. He'd wanted to tell my family immediately, but I'd asked him to wait, to trust me. Now he raised his glass slightly in my direction, a small gesture of solidarity that nobody else noticed. "I just didn't see the point in mentioning it since you've made it clear over the years that my life choices don't really interest you." Victoria's shriek cut through the murmurs rippling across the ballroom. "You selfish bitch! You're trying to ruin my wedding!" She gathered her massive skirt and stormed toward me, her face contorted with rage that shattered her carefully curated bridal glow. "This is my day. Mine. You've always been jealous that Mom and Dad actually care about my happiness." I didn't step back, didn't flinch. Instead, I let my smile widen just slightly. "Jealous? Of what exactly, Victoria?" I gestured around the opulent ballroom, at the $10,000 floral arrangements, the 5-tier cake, the ice sculpture melting slowly near the bar. "Of Mom and Dad spending $200,000 on your party? Interesting number, that. Very specific." My mother moved between us, her social smile plastered back on for the watching guests, but her eyes were cold fury. "Rachel, we need to talk. Privately. Right now." She gripped my arm hard enough to bruise, but I'd spent years learning not to show pain around these people. "Actually, Mother, I think it's better we talk right here." I pulled my arm free and opened my clutch again, this time removing a folded set of papers. "See, I've been meaning to discuss something with you and Dad. About Grandma Helen's trust fund. The one she set up for me before she died. The $500,000 that was supposed to be released to me when I turned 25. The color that had drained from my mother's face didn't return. If anything, she went even paler. My father's hand, still clutching his champagne flute, began to shake. Victoria looked between them, confusion replacing her anger. "What trust fund?" "The one," I continued, my voice steady and clear, projecting just enough that nearby guests could hear every word, "that Mom and Dad emptied 4 years ago. The one they told me didn't exist when I asked about it after Grandma's funeral. The one they used to fund Victoria's lifestyle, her apartment, her car, and apparently, this wedding." My father found his voice, though it came out rough and desperate. "You don't know what you're talking about. That money was needed for family investments. You're being dramatic." I unfolded the papers slowly, deliberately. Bank statements, transfer records, emails between my parents and their financial advisor discussing how to redirect Rachel's inheritance for more pressing family needs. All of it meticulously documented. All of it legally obtained through a former colleague who happened to be very good at finding paper trails. All of it completely damning. I'm a corporate lawyer, Dad, specializing in family trust disputes. I watched the realization hit him, watched him understand that his corporate attorney daughter had skills he'd never bothered to ask about. "I know exactly what I'm talking about, and I know exactly how much trouble you're both in for embezzlement and breach of fiduciary duty." The ballroom wasn't silent anymore. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Phones appeared, recording the perfect Instagram wedding turning into a legal nightmare. Victoria stood frozen, her bouquet drooping in her hand, mascara beginning to run as she finally understood that her perfect day, Her perfect life had been built on money stolen from her sister. But I wasn't done. Not even close. The interesting thing about trust fund fraud, I said, my voice cutting through the chaos, is that it carries both civil and criminal penalties, especially when the amount exceeds $250,000. I looked directly at my father, at the man who'd spent my entire life telling me I'd never amount to anything, that I should be more like Victoria, that my choices were disappointments. I filed the lawsuit this morning. The prosecutor's office receives my complaint on Monday. My mother's social mask shattered completely. You're going to destroy this family over money? After everything we've done for you? I laughed, and it felt like breaking free from chains I hadn't realized I'd been wearing. Everything you've done? You mean like forgetting my high school graduation because Victoria had a tennis tournament? Or missing my law school graduation because Victoria needed help moving into her third apartment? Or telling me my job was cute while you bragged about Victoria's Instagram following? I shook my head. No, Mother, this isn't about the money. This is about 29 years of being invisible while you poured everything into your favorite daughter. David appeared at my side then, his hand finding mine. Strong, steady, real in a way my family had never been. We should go, he said quietly, his eyes on the security guards my father had just signaled toward us. But I had one more thing to do. One more bomb to drop. I turned to Victoria, who was crying now, her perfect makeup ruined, her perfect day destroyed. I hope your marriage is happy, Victoria. Really, I do. I meant it too. Because what came next wasn't about petty revenge. It was about justice. Just so you know, the prenup Michael signed, the one Dad's lawyer drew up, it's not worth the paper it's printed on. I had a friend review it. Errors everywhere. Almost like someone wanted to make sure Michael would get nothing in a divorce. I paused. I sent him the corrected version this morning. You might want to check your phone. I think he's been trying to call you. Victoria's hand flew to her clutch, fumbling for her phone. The look on her face when she saw the 17 missed calls from her brand new husband told me everything I needed to know. Enjoy your reception, I said, squeezing David's hand. We have somewhere to be. As we walked toward the exit, I heard my father's voice rising above the chaos, trying to regain control, trying to spin this somehow, but it was too late. The guests had their phones out. The story was already spreading, and on Monday morning, when that prosecutor's office opened, my parents were going to learn something I'd known my whole life. Being underestimated is the best weapon you can have. The ride back to our downtown apartment should have felt victorious, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. David drove in silence, occasionally glancing at me with concern that made my chest tight. 3 months married, and he still looked at me like I was something precious, something worth protecting. My family had never looked at me that way. Pull over, I said suddenly as we crossed the Congress Avenue Bridge. David didn't question it, just smoothly guided his Tesla to the overlook where tourists gathered to watch the bats at sunset. Now, at 11 at night, it was deserted except for the city lights reflecting off the water below. I stepped out into the humid Texas air, leaning against the railing. Behind me, I heard David's door close, then his footsteps approaching. He didn't touch me, didn't crowd me, just stood close enough that I could feel his presence. When I was 7, I said, staring at the dark water, I won the school science fair, built a working model of the water cycle. Took me 2 months. The memory was so clear it hurt. Victoria threw a tantrum because she didn't get first place in the spelling bee that same day. Mom and Dad took us out for ice cream to cheer Victoria up. Nobody even mentioned my project. David's hand found the small of my back, warm and steady. I'm sorry. When I was 16, I got accepted to the debate team, made it to state championships. I laughed without humor. Victoria's boyfriend broke up with her that week. Family therapy sessions for months. I took the bus to state, alone, lost in the finals because I couldn't focus. I turned to face him. When I graduated law school, summa cum laude, Victoria posted an Instagram photo of her new puppy. Mom commented 17 times. She didn't comment once on my graduation announcement. Rachel, I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I cut him off gently. I'm telling you because tonight, for the first time in my life, they actually saw me. They had to look directly at me and acknowledge that I exist, that I matter, that I'm more than just Victoria's disappointing older sister. My voice cracked slightly, and it felt better than I ever imagined it would. David pulled me into his arms then, and I let myself lean into him. Let myself be vulnerable in a way I'd learned never to be around my family. What you did tonight was brave, he murmured into my hair, standing up to them, claiming what's yours. What I did tonight was just the beginning. I pulled back enough to look at him. The lawsuit is real. The criminal complaint is real. By Monday afternoon, their bank accounts will be frozen pending investigation. By Tuesday, the construction company will be dealing with angry clients because Dad won't be able to make payroll. I watched his expression carefully, looking for judgment, for horror at my ruthlessness. Does that make me a bad person? It makes you someone who finally stopped setting herself on fire to keep other people warm. He cupped my face in his hands. And I'm proud of you. My phone had been buzzing nonstop in my clutch. 53 missed calls. Hundreds of texts. I pulled it out and scrolled through the notifications. Victoria's messages devolved from furious to desperate to incoherent. My mother's were all variations of, "How could you?" and "After everything we've done." My father's were threats, thinly veiled as concern for my mental health. But there was one message that made me pause. From Michael, Victoria's new husband. "We need to talk. Tomorrow. Please." David read over my shoulder. "Are you going to respond?" "Not tonight." I silenced the phone completely and dropped it back in my clutch. "Tonight, I'm going to go home with my husband, pour 2 glasses of the expensive wine we've been saving, and celebrate the fact that I don't have to pretend anymore." We were almost to the car when my phone rang again, the vibration muffled but persistent. I ignored it. Then David's phone started ringing. He pulled it out, frowning at the screen. "It's my mother. That's weird, she never calls this late." A cold feeling settled in my stomach as he answered. I watched his expression change from confused to angry to something darker. "I understand. Yes. No, that won't be necessary. Thank you for calling." He ended the call and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Your father called my parents, told them you had a psychotic break at Victoria's wedding, that you're making false accusations because you're mentally unstable and I should be concerned for my safety." The cold feeling spread through my entire body. He's trying to isolate me, make me look crazy so nobody believes the lawsuit. My mother, David said slowly, his jaw tight, told him that her daughter-in-law is a respected attorney with a sterling reputation, and if he ever calls their house again spreading lies, she'll add harassment to your list of charges. He smiled, sharp and proud. "She also said we should come for dinner tomorrow so she can hear the whole story and offer her support." I had to lean against the car as relief flooded through me. His family believed me, supported me, stood with me without question. The contrast to my own family was so stark it made my eyes burn. "Hey." David tilted my chin up. "You're not alone in this. You were never going to be alone in this. That's what marriage means." The drive home took 15 minutes. We didn't talk, but David kept one hand on my knee, grounding me, reminding me I was real, that this was real. When we finally walked into our apartment, the space we'd carefully furnished together over the past 3 months, I felt some of the tension begin to drain away. David poured the wine while I kicked off my heels and collapsed onto our couch. He handed me a glass and sat beside me, pulling my feet into his lap. For a long moment, we just sat there in comfortable silence. "I found out about the trust fund 2 weeks ago," I finally said. "My grandmother's old accountant reached out. He'd been retired for 5 years, but he'd heard I was asking questions after Grandma's death. He couldn't legally tell me anything while he was still working, but retirement freed him." I took a long sip of wine. He gave me copies of everything. The original trust documents, the transfer records, email chains discussing how to minimize Rachel's expectations. David's hand stilled on my ankle. 2 weeks? You've been carrying this for 2 weeks? I had to plan carefully. File the right paperwork. Talk to the right people. I met his eyes. I needed to make sure when I struck, it would be devastating and permanent. No wiggle room, no second chances. I set down my wine glass. My father has spent 30 years being underestimated in business. People see the construction company and assume he's just another contractor. They don't realize he's actually brilliant at manipulation, at finding loopholes, at making problems disappear. "So you learned from him?" "I learned from him," I agreed. "And then I became better at it than he ever was, because I have something he doesn't." "What's that?" "Patience." I leaned back against the couch. "He acts on impulse, on emotion. He saw an opportunity to use my inheritance and took it without thinking about consequences. I've been planning this for 2 weeks, but really, I've been preparing for it my whole life. Every time they chose Victoria over me, every time they made me invisible, they were teaching me how to move through the world unseen, how to gather information, how to strike when nobody's looking." David was quiet for a moment, processing. Then he asked the question I'd been expecting. "What happens on Monday?" "On Monday, the lawsuit becomes public record. The court will freeze their assets pending investigation. Dad's business accounts, their personal accounts, everything. I ticked off points on my fingers. The construction company has 3 major projects with milestone payments due next week. Without access to operating capital, he can't pay subcontractors. Projects stall, penalties kick in, clients sue for breach of contract. And your mother? Mom's name is on everything. Joint accounts, joint ownership of the house, joint ownership of the business. She's just as liable as he is. I felt no satisfaction saying it, but no guilt either. She made her choices. She spent 29 years actively participating in making me feel worthless. She doesn't get to claim ignorance now. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from a number I didn't recognize. This is Margaret Chen, David's mother. We're having brunch tomorrow at 11. Bring your appetite and your documentation. I know some people who might be helpful. P.S. Welcome to the family officially. I showed David the message. He grinned. I told you my mom would love you. Your mom doesn't even know me. She knows you stood up to people who hurt you. She knows you're smart enough to build an airtight case. And she knows you make me happy. He pulled me closer. That's all she needs to know. At midnight, I received an email from Victoria. Not a text, an actual email, which meant she was trying to be formal, to rebuild bridges with professionalism. The subject line read, "We need to fix this." I opened it. Rachel, I know you're angry, but destroying mom and dad won't fix anything. They made mistakes, yes, but they're still our parents. Can't we talk about this like adults? Maybe there's a way to work this out without lawsuits and criminal charges. Victoria. I read it twice, looking for sincerity, for actual acknowledgement of the harm done. Found none. Just Victoria, as always, trying to smooth things over so her life could return to comfortable. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up the files my grandmother's accountant had sent. $500,000. Not just money, but years of Grandma Helen's careful savings, her investments, her legacy specifically designated for me. She'd known somehow that I would need it. That my parents couldn't be trusted to treat me fairly. There was a handwritten note scanned into the documents, dated 3 months before Grandma died. Her shaky handwriting, but clear intent. To Rachel, my brilliant girl who never got the recognition she deserved. Use this to build the life you want, free from those who can't see your worth. You were always my favorite, sweetheart. Don't let them dim your light. I hadn't cried at her funeral, hadn't let myself feel the loss fully because my parents had spent the entire service talking about how Victoria had given such a beautiful eulogy, how Victoria had chosen such perfect flowers, how Victoria was handling the grief with such grace. Now, alone in my apartment, with my husband in the next room, I let myself cry. For the grandmother who saw me. For the 29 years of being invisible. For the little girl who'd built that water cycle project and just wanted someone to be proud. David found me like that, tears streaming down my face, laptop open to Grandma's note. He didn't ask questions, just closed the laptop gently, gathered me into his arms, and held me while I finally grieved everything I'd lost and everything I'd never had. Tomorrow starts a new chapter, he murmured when I'd finally stopped crying. Whatever happens, we face it together. I nodded against his chest, drawing strength from his certainty. Tomorrow I would be strong again. Tomorrow I would be the ruthless attorney who'd filed an airtight lawsuit. Tomorrow I would face my family's wrath and my sister's desperate attempts at reconciliation with cold professionalism. But tonight, I let myself be vulnerable. Let myself be held. Let myself accept that being loved wasn't something I had to earn through achievement or silence or making myself small. Tonight, I was just Rachel. And that was enough. Brunch at the Chen family home was nothing like meals with my own family. Margaret Chen, David's mother, greeted me with a warm hug that lasted several seconds too long, like she was trying to transfer strength through physical contact. David's father, Thomas, shook my hand solemnly and said, "We're honored to have you in our family, Rachel." Officially now. Their home in Westlake Hills was modest compared to my parents' sprawling estate, but it felt lived in, loved. Photos covered every surface, including several of David and me from our courthouse wedding that I hadn't realized he'd shared with them. The dining table was set with care, fresh flowers in the center, and enough food to feed 10 people instead of 4. I made too much, Margaret said with a knowing smile. Force of habit from raising 3 sons, but I figured you might need comfort food today. As we ate, I laid out the documentation, bank statements, transfer records, emails, the original trust documents. Margaret, a retired CPA, examined everything with professional precision, while Thomas, a former district attorney, read through the legal filings I'd prepared. "This is airtight," Thomas said finally, looking up at me with something like respect. "You've anticipated every possible defense they could mount. Every loophole is closed." He paused. "You're very good at this." I had excellent motivation. I took a sip of tea, my hands steadier than they'd been last night. "My father is going to fight dirty. He'll try to paint me as vindictive, mentally unstable, influenced by outside parties." I glanced at David. "He's already started by calling you." Margaret made a dismissive sound. "Robert Morgan is a bully who's never been challenged. Bullies always panic when someone finally stands up to them." She tapped the bank statements. "The problem is, he's liquidated assets before. Look at these transactions from 4 years ago, right after he emptied your trust. He moved money offshore, probably thinking he'd need a safety net if you ever figured it out." Thomas leaned forward. "Margaret's right. If you want to guarantee he can't hide assets before the freeze takes effect, you need to move faster than Monday." "What do you mean?" "Emergency injunction. We file today, cite the evidence of prior asset movement as proof of flight risk. Judge reviews it immediately, issues a temporary restraining order on all financial accounts pending Monday's full hearing." He was already pulling out his phone. "I know 3 judges who handle emergency filings on weekends. One of them owes me a favor." I stared at him. "You'd do that for me? You barely know me." Margaret reached across the table and took my hand. "You're David's wife. That makes you family. And in this family, we protect each other." Her eyes were fierce. "What your parents did to you is unconscionable. You don't embezzle from your own child. You don't erase someone's future because it's convenient." 2 hours later, I was in Thomas's home office on a video call with Judge Patricia Winters, a stern woman in her 60s who listened intently as I presented the evidence. Thomas sat beside me, occasionally interjecting legal points, while David and Margaret waited in the living room. "This level of financial manipulation is disturbing," Judge Winters said when I finished. "And you're certain about the offshore accounts?" Margaret Chen identified the transactions. She's a retired CPA with 40 years of experience in forensic accounting. I pulled up the relevant documents on screen. "These transfers here 4 years ago total approximately $300,000, moved to accounts in the Cayman Islands through shell corporations." Judge Winters was silent for a long moment, reviewing the documents. Then she nodded sharply. "I'm issuing an emergency TRO effective immediately. All accounts associated with Robert and Patricia Morgan are frozen as of right now. I'm also issuing a warrant for financial records from their offshore accounts." She looked directly at me through the screen. "This will not be pleasant, Ms. Morgan. Your parents will know by tonight that they've lost access to everything. They will be angry. I understand, Your Honor." "Do you?" Her expression softened slightly. "I've seen these cases destroy families permanently. Once you go down this path, there's rarely a way back. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about 29 years of being invisible, about Grandma Helen's note, about Victoria's wedding, and my father's question about when it would be my turn, asked with the casual cruelty of someone who'd never once considered my feelings. "Yes, Your Honor, I'm prepared." The TRO hit at 4 p.m. I was back at our apartment when my phone started ringing. First Victoria, then my mother, then numbers I didn't recognize. I let them all go to voicemail. David sat beside me on the couch, his laptop open to his work email, but his attention clearly on me. "You should listen to them," he said gently. "At least Victoria's. She's not responsible for what your parents did." He was right. I pulled up Victoria's voicemail and put it on speaker. "Rachel, what the fuck did you do?" Victoria's voice was panicked, shrill. "Dad can't access any of his accounts. The construction company is frozen. He has $150,000 in payroll due tomorrow and he can't pay anyone. Mom's cards aren't working. Our house payment is due and they can't make it." A pause. Breathing hard. "Michael left me. He said the prenup thing was the last straw, that he didn't sign up to marry into a family this dysfunctional. My marriage lasted exactly 12 hours, Rachel. 12 fucking hours." Her voice broke. "And now Mom and Dad are talking about losing everything because you couldn't just let the past stay in the past. Do you have any idea what you've done?" The voicemail ended. I sat there, processing. Part of me felt guilt, sharp and unexpected. Victoria's marriage ending wasn't part of the plan. Michael leaving her was collateral damage I hadn't anticipated. But the larger part of me, the part that had been hardened by 3 decades of neglect, felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Victoria was finally experiencing what it felt like to have everything taken away, to be powerless, to watch her perfect life crumble. "She blames me," I said quietly. "Not Mom and Dad for stealing my inheritance. Not herself for benefiting from it for years. Me, for finally standing up for myself. David closed his laptop. That's not fair of her. No, it's not. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Austin skyline. But it's exactly what I expected. Victoria has never had to take responsibility for anything. Mom and Dad always fixed her problems, smoothed over her mistakes, funded her failures. She doesn't know how to function without that safety net. My phone buzzed with a text. This time from Michael. Thank you. I mean that sincerely. You saved me from making a terrible mistake. Victoria is not who I thought she was. I showed David. He whistled low. He figured it out fast. He's a corporate lawyer, too. Probably started asking questions about the family finances during the prenup conversation I triggered. Did some digging, saw the same red flags I saw. I typed a response. I'm sorry your marriage ended. That wasn't my intention. Then I paused and added, but I'm not sorry I told you the truth. His response came immediately. Neither am I. At 6 p.m., there was pounding on our apartment door. Aggressive, sustained, the kind that made the neighbors peer out from their units. David moved to answer, but I stopped him. I'll handle this. I looked through the peephole. My father stood in the hallway, his face purple with rage, still wearing the suit from Victoria's wedding, but now rumpled, tie loosened. My mother stood slightly behind him, her eyes red from crying, her usual perfect composure shattered. I opened the door but kept the chain engaged. You need to leave, now. You've destroyed us, my father's voice echoed down the hallway. The business is ruined. We'll lose the house. Everything we've built, gone because you're a vindictive, selfish. Everything you built with my money, I interrupted coldly. My inheritance that you stole. My future that you erased without a second thought. We were going to pay you back, my mother cried. We just needed time. Needed to get through some rough patches in the business. You had 4 years. I kept my voice level, lawyerly, emotionless. 4 years where you could have come to me, explained the situation, asked for help. Instead, you pretended the money never existed. You let me think Grandma left me nothing while you spent $500,000 on Victoria's lifestyle. She's your sister, my father roared. Family takes care of family. You're right. I felt something cold and final settle in my chest. Family should take care of family. They should celebrate each other's achievements. They should show up for important moments. They should treat each child with equal love and respect. I looked directly at my father. You failed at all of that. For 29 years, you made it clear I was the disappointment, the problem, the one who would never measure up to Victoria. Now you're upset that the disappointment turned out to be smarter than you? My mother pressed forward against the door. Rachel, please. We made mistakes, yes. But we can fix this. Drop the lawsuit, drop the criminal complaint, and we'll find a way to repay you. We'll do better. You'll promise whatever you need to promise to make this go away, I finished. And then once the legal pressure is off, you'll go right back to treating me like I don't exist. I know how this works, Mother. I've watched you manipulate people my entire life. I learned from the best. You've ruined your sister's life. She sobbed. Her marriage is over. She's devastated. How can you be so cruel? I told her the truth about her prenup. That's not cruelty. That's honesty. I felt David move closer behind me, his presence supporting without interfering. Victoria's marriage ended because it was built on lies, just like this family, just like everything you two touch. My father's face was pure hatred now. You're not my daughter anymore. Do you hear me? You're dead to me. I won't have this betrayal. Good. The word cut him off mid-sentence. That makes this easier, because you've been dead to me for years, Dad. You just didn't notice because you were too busy focusing on Victoria. I started to close the door. Don't come back here. Don't call. Don't try to contact me or my husband. Any further communication goes through my attorney. This isn't over, he shouted as I shut the door and engaged the deadbolt. I'll fight this. I'll prove you're mentally unstable. You'll lose, I said through the door, my voice calm and certain. You'll lose because the evidence is overwhelming. Because the law is on my side. Because you're not as smart as you think you are. I paused. But mostly, you'll lose because I'm not 7 years old anymore. Desperate for your approval, I'm done setting myself on fire to keep you warm. Their voices continued in the hallway for another minute before building security arrived. I heard the guard firmly but politely ask them to leave. Heard my father's blustering threats about lawyers and lawsuits. Heard my mother's desperate pleas, then silence. David wrapped his arms around me from behind. I was shaking, I realized. Not from fear or doubt, but from the adrenaline of finally finally saying everything I'd needed to say for decades. "You okay?" he murmured into my hair. "No." I turned in his arms, "But I will be." That night, I drafted an email to Victoria. Not a response to her angry voicemail, but something I needed to say for my own closure. "Victoria, I'm not sorry for what I did. I'm sorry that you're collateral damage, but I'm not sorry for seeking justice for myself. For 29 years, I watched Mom and Dad give you everything while I got scraps. I watched them fund your life with money that was legally mine. I watched you benefit from my inheritance while believing you'd earned it through your own merit. Michael leaving isn't my fault. It's the consequence of building a marriage on a foundation of lies and financial manipulation. If your relationship couldn't survive basic honesty about family finances, it wasn't going to survive anyway. I tried for years to have a real relationship with you, to be the sister who supported your dreams even when mine were ignored. But you never once noticed that I was struggling, that I was hurt, that I existed beyond being your inferior shadow. You benefited from my invisibility just as much as Mom and Dad did. So no, I'm not sorry. I'm done being sorry for taking up space, for having needs, for demanding to be treated with basic respect and fairness. You're devastated because your perfect life imploded? Welcome to how I've felt every single day since I was 7 years old. Don't contact me again unless it's to genuinely apologize. And I mean genuinely, not, "I'm sorry you feel that way." Or, "I'm sorry this is hard for you." I mean, "I'm sorry I participated in making you feel worthless for decades, and I understand why you had to do this." I'm not holding my breath. Rachel, I read it 3 times, then deleted it without sending. Victoria wouldn't understand. Wouldn't want to understand. And I didn't need her to. The message was for me, not her. By midnight, social media had exploded. Someone at the wedding had filmed the confrontation and posted it. The video had been shared thousands of times, picked up by local news outlets, turned into memes and reaction videos. Bride's sister ruins wedding by announcing secret marriage was trending on Austin Twitter, but then the narrative shifted. Someone found Margaret Chen's LinkedIn post from earlier that evening. "Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand up to family who hurt you. Proud to call Rachel Morgan my daughter-in-law. A justice matters. Family is who you choose." Other people started commenting with their own stories of stolen inheritances, of being the forgotten child, of toxic family dynamics. By morning, public opinion had swung firmly to my side. The headlines changed from "Sister Ruins Wedding" to "Woman Sues Parents for Stealing $500K Inheritance" to "Corporate Lawyer Takes Down Family Who Embezzled Her Future." I woke up to 3 interview requests from local news stations, 5 from podcasts covering legal drama, and 1 from a documentary filmmaker who wanted to tell my story. I declined them all. This wasn't about public vindication. It was about justice, cold and permanent and legally sound. Monday morning arrived with the precision of a guillotine blade dropping. The Travis County Courthouse was already crowded with reporters when Thomas David and I arrived at 8 a.m. My father's attorney, a slick corporate lawyer named Bradford Keene, was holding an impromptu press conference on the courthouse steps, spinning a narrative about vindictive daughters and family disputes blown out of proportion. "This is a private family matter," Keene said into a cluster of microphones, his silver hair perfectly styled, his $1,000 suit projecting confidence. "My clients made some bookkeeping errors regarding a trust fund, nothing criminal, and they're committed to resolving this amicably with their daughter. These allegations of embezzlement are dramatic exaggerations." "Mr. Keene," a reporter interrupted, "isn't it true that a judge issued an emergency TRO freezing all of your clients' accounts? That doesn't sound like a bookkeeping error." Keene's smile tightened. "The TRO was issued based on incomplete information. We're confident that once the full facts are presented—" "The full facts," I said, stepping forward before Thomas could stop me, "are in the 57 pages of documented evidence I submitted to the court, including email chains where my parents discussed how to hide the theft, transfer records showing systematic embezzlement over 4 years, and offshore account statements proving they were preparing for exactly this scenario." Keene's face went carefully blank, but I saw the moment of panic in his eyes. He hadn't known about the offshore accounts. My father had kept that secret even from his own attorney. "Ms. Morgan," a reporter called out, "what do you want to happen to your parents?" I looked directly at the cameras. "I want justice. I want them held accountable for stealing my grandmother's legacy. And I want every other person who's had their inheritance stolen by family to know that you can fight back. You can win." Inside the courtroom, my parents sat at the defendant's table looking smaller than I'd ever seen them. My mother's designer clothes couldn't hide the exhaustion in her face, the red-rimmed eyes, the trembling hands. My father stared straight ahead, his jaw locked in stubborn rage, refusing to even look at me. Victoria wasn't there. According to a text from Margaret Chen, she'd checked into a hotel using credit cards that had been declined, then called her in-laws crying. Margaret, with typical Chen family kindness, had paid for the hotel and sent over groceries. "She's your sister," Margaret had texted. "Not her fault your parents are criminals." Judge Patricia Winters entered, and the bailiff called the court to order. What followed was 3 hours of legal testimony so damning that even Bradford Keene stopped trying to spin it. The offshore accounts, the falsified documents, the emails discussing how I was too focused on her career to notice the theft, the deliberate destruction of the original trust paperwork that my grandmother had filed. The worst moment came when the prosecutor presented evidence that my father had forged Grandma Helen's signature on documents, claiming she'd changed the trust terms before her death. Medical records proved she'd been in hospice, barely conscious, on the date of the supposed signature. My mother broke down crying then, her composure finally shattering completely. "I didn't know," she sobbed. "Robert said it was legal, that Helen had agreed to it before she got too sick. I didn't know he'd forged anything." "Shut up, Patricia," my father hissed, and in that moment, I saw their marriage clearly. She'd been his accomplice, yes, but also his victim. Following his lead, trusting his judgment, sacrificing her own morals to maintain the lifestyle and status he'd built. It didn't excuse what she'd done to me, but it explained it. Judge Winters called a 15-minute recess. In the hallway, Thomas pulled me aside. "They're going to try to plea bargain." Keene just approached me. "Your father will admit to embezzlement if we drop the fraud and forgery charges. He'll serve 2 years minimum, pay full restitution plus penalties, and your mother walks with probation." No, the word came out flat, final. "He forged my dying grandmother's signature. He falsified legal documents. He doesn't get to reduce charges just because he got caught." "Rachel, I know you're angry. I'm not angry, Thomas. I'm done being merciful to people who would never show me mercy." I looked through the courtroom window at my father, who was conferring with his attorney, still projecting that arrogant confidence. "If we take the plea, he serves minimum security for 2 years and comes out with his reputation somewhat intact. I want him destroyed. Completely." Thomas studied me for a long moment. "You sound like me 30 years ago when I was a prosecutor, before I learned that revenge and justice aren't always the same thing." "Maybe not." I met his eyes steadily. "But in this case, they're close enough." When we returned to the courtroom, Keene officially presented the plea offer. Judge Winters looked at me expectantly. "Ms. Morgan, as the victim in this case, your input on the plea arrangement is significant. How do you feel about the proposed terms?" I stood slowly. "Your Honor, I reject the plea offer. I want this to go to trial. I want every piece of evidence presented publicly. I want a jury to see exactly what my parents did, how they planned it, how they executed it, and how they tried to cover it up." I paused. "And I want them to face the maximum penalties allowed by law." The courtroom erupted in whispers. My father's face went purple. My mother looked like she might faint. Bradford Keene shot me a look of pure hatred, before turning to whisper urgently with my father. Judge Winters banged her gavel. "Order. Miss Morgan, you understand that going to trial means exposing your private family matters to extensive public scrutiny? That every detail of your relationship with your parents will be examined?" "I understand, Your Honor. I have nothing to hide. They have everything to hide." She nodded slowly. "Very well. Trial is set for 6 weeks from today. In the meantime, the TRO remains in effect. Mr. and Mrs. Morgan, you are prohibited from accessing any funds except for a modest living allowance to be determined by this court. You will surrender your passports immediately, and you will have no contact, direct or indirect, with the plaintiff." She looked at my parents with clear disdain. "I suggest you use the next 6 weeks to consider the full scope of your actions." As the bailiff took my parents' passports, my father finally looked at me. His eyes were full of hate so pure it should have frightened me. Instead, I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Let him hate me. Let him rage. It didn't matter anymore. Outside the courthouse, the press was waiting again. This time, I didn't stop to make a statement. Thomas ran interference while David guided me to the car, his hand protective on my lower back. But I heard the questions shouted from reporters. "Do you feel guilty about destroying your family? What about your sister? Is the money worth losing your parents?" I didn't answer. Didn't need to. The legal system would answer for me. That evening, Victoria finally called. Not texted, actually called. I almost didn't answer, but David's words from before echoed. She wasn't responsible for what our parents did. "What do you want, Victoria?" Silence on the line. Then quietly, "I saw the evidence. Margaret Chen showed me everything. The emails, the forgery, all of it. Another pause. I didn't know. Rachel, I swear to God, I didn't know they stole from you. Didn't know or didn't ask. I kept my voice neutral, lawyerly. $500,000 paid for your apartment, your car, your lifestyle for 4 years. You never once questioned where that money came from? Mom said it was from Dad's business bonuses, that the company was doing really well. Her voice was small. I believed her. Of course you did. Because it was convenient to believe her. Because questioning meant risking your comfortable life. I walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Do you know what I was doing while you were living in a luxury apartment paid with my inheritance? Working 2 jobs to pay my law school loans, eating ramen, wearing the same 3 professional outfits on rotation because I couldn't afford more. I'm sorry. She was crying now. Rachel, I'm so sorry. I was selfish and blind, and I took everything for granted. I should have seen what they were doing. I should have noticed you were struggling. I should have been a better sister. It was exactly the apology I'd said I wanted in that unsent email. But hearing it now, I felt nothing but exhaustion. Thank you for saying that. Can we try to fix this? Can I do anything to help? I thought about it seriously. Victoria had benefited from the theft, yes. But she'd also been manipulated by our parents just like I had. Just in a different direction. She'd been made into the golden child. Pressured to be perfect. Used as a weapon against me without fully understanding what they were doing. You can testify, I said finally. When the trial happens, you can tell the truth about what they told you, about where you thought the money came from, about how they pitted us against each other. I paused. And after the trial, after all of this is done, maybe we can try to build something real, an actual sisterhood, not whatever toxic dynamic they created. I'll testify. Her voice was firm now. I'll tell them everything. And Rachel? She took a shaky breath. I'm glad you did this. I'm glad you stood up for yourself. You're braver than I've ever been. After we hung up, David asked, Do you believe her? I don't know. I leaned against him, but I think she's finally starting to see our parents clearly. That's a start. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of trial preparation. Depositions, evidence review, strategy sessions with Thomas and the prosecutor. Victoria did testify at a preliminary hearing, and her testimony was damning. She corroborated that our parents had deliberately kept her ignorant about the trust, that they'd encouraged her to spend freely without explaining the source, that they'd used her as a weapon to keep me in line. My father's construction business collapsed completely. Without access to operating capital, he couldn't meet payroll or pay subcontractors. Projects stalled. Clients sued. The company that had taken him 30 years to build was liquidated within a month. The assets seized to pay debts and penalties. My mother tried to reach out through Margaret Chen, asking if there was any way to resolve this misunderstanding. Margaret, bless her, responded with a single line. Your daughter is not interested in misunderstandings. She's interested in justice. The public continued to dissect every aspect of the case. True crime podcasts did deep dives into family financial abuse. TikTok videos analyzed the power dynamics of golden children and scapegoats. I became an unwilling symbol of standing up to toxic families. And through it all, David was there. Steady. Supportive. Never asking me to soften or compromise or consider their feelings above my own needs. When I woke up from nightmares about 7-year-old me being ignored at the science fair, he held me. When I felt guilty about Victoria's divorce, he reminded me that truth isn't cruelty. When I wondered if I was being too harsh, he showed me Grandma Helen's note again. You're not doing this for revenge, he said one night as we reviewed trial documents. You're doing this because it's right. Because what they did was criminal. Because other people need to see that this kind of abuse has consequences. He was right. This had stopped being personal weeks ago. Now it was about precedent, about sending a message, about making sure the next person whose family stole from them knew they could fight back and win. The trial was set to begin on a Tuesday in July. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. 4 hours where I sat in the courthouse hallway with David and Thomas. My hands clasped so tightly my knuckles went white. Margaret had brought sandwiches that nobody ate. Victoria texted updates from inside the courtroom where she was waiting with the prosecutor. When the bailiff called us back in, my legs felt disconnected from my body. The jury filed in, their faces carefully neutral. My father sat rigid at the defense table. My mother had her head bowed, fingers working her pearl necklace compulsively. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Winters asked. We have, Your Honor. The foreperson, A middle-aged black woman who'd been an accountant before retiring stood with the verdict form. On the charge of embezzlement, how do you find the defendants? Guilty. My mother's sob echoed through the courtroom. On the charge of fraud? Guilty. My father's jaw clenched, but he didn't move. On the charge of forgery of legal documents? Guilty. Bradford Keene closed his eyes briefly. He'd tried everything, painting me as vindictive, suggesting the offshore accounts were legitimate business holdings, arguing that my parents had planned to repay me. None of it had worked against the mountain of evidence. On the charge of conspiracy to commit financial crimes? Guilty on all counts, Your Honor. Judge Winters nodded, her face impassive. The defendants will remain in custody pending sentencing, which will occur 2 weeks from today. She looked at my parents directly. You have been found guilty by a jury of your peers of systematically stealing from your own daughter, forging a dying woman's signature, and attempting to hide your crimes through offshore accounts. I want you to understand that these are not minor offenses. These are serious felonies that show a pattern of deliberate, calculated betrayal. My father finally broke. That money should have gone to the family. Helen was my mother, too. She didn't have the right to. She had every right. Judge Winters' voice cut through his outburst like a blade. It was her money, her choice, and her legal will that you violated. Your sense of entitlement does not override the law. She banged her gavel. Court is adjourned. As the bailiffs led my parents away in handcuffs, my mother looked back at me one last time. Not with hate like my father, but with something worse. Incomprehension. She still didn't understand what she'd done wrong. Still saw herself as the victim of my vindictiveness rather than the perpetrator of theft and emotional abuse. Outside the courthouse, I made one statement to the press. Justice was served today. I hope this verdict sends a message that family relationships don't excuse criminal behavior. That's all I have to say. The sentencing hearing 2 weeks later was brief. Judge Winters sentenced my father to 8 years in state prison, my mother to 5 years with the possibility of parole after 3. Full restitution of $500,000 plus accumulated interest and penalties brought the total to nearly $700,000. Their house would be sold to cover part of it. The rest would come from the liquidation of remaining assets. You destroyed your family for money. My father spat at me as the bailiffs prepared to take him away. I hope it was worth it. I looked at him directly. You destroyed our family when you stole my inheritance and made me invisible for 29 years. I just documented it. He lunged toward me then, rage finally breaking through his controlled facade. The bailiffs restrained him easily, hauling him back. His shouts echoed through the courthouse. You're dead to me. You're not my daughter. I'll never forgive this. Good, I said quietly, but loud enough for him to hear. I don't want your forgiveness. I want you to understand that actions have consequences. That's all I've ever wanted. My mother said nothing as they led her away, just cried silently. Her perfect facade crumbled beyond repair. In the hallway afterward, Victoria approached hesitantly. She'd lost weight in the past 2 months, her designer clothes hanging loose. Thank you, she said, for letting me testify, for telling me the truth about the prenup, for everything. I didn't do it for you. I kept my voice level but not unkind. But I'm glad you finally see them clearly. Can we, she swallowed hard, can we try to be sisters? Real ones? Not whatever toxic thing they created? I thought about Grandma Helen's note. About 29 years of being invisible. About the 7-year-old at the science fair. And I thought about the Victoria I'd known as a child, before our parents had turned us into competitors, before she'd been weaponized against me. Not yet, I said honestly. Maybe someday. But right now, I need space to heal from all of this. And you need to figure out who you are without their influence. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I understand. Thank you for not hating me. I don't hate you, Victoria. I just don't know you. Not really. I paused. But when you figure out who you are, when you've done the work to understand your part in all of this, call me. We'll get coffee. It was more than she deserved, probably. But it was also more than our parents had ever given me. The possibility of redemption, of change, of building something new from the ruins. David drove me home in silence, his hand finding mine as we crossed the river. The same overlook where we'd stopped the night of Victoria's wedding came into view. He pulled over without asking. How do you feel? He asked. I thought about it seriously. Relieved. Exhausted. Sad for what could have been. I looked at him, but mostly, I feel free. For the first time in my life, I'm not carrying their expectations, their disappointment, their theft. It's done. Your grandmother would be proud. I hope so. I pulled out my phone and opened the photo of her note, the one I'd read dozens of times over the past months. She knew. Somehow she knew exactly what would happen, and she gave me the tools to fight back. We sat there as the sun set over Austin, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. My phone buzzed with messages. Reporters, well-wishers, other people sharing their own stories of stolen inheritances and toxic families. I ignored them all. "What happens now?" David asked. "Now I go back to work. Back to normal life." I smiled slightly. Whatever normal means after all this. And the money? When you get the restitution? I'd been thinking about that. $700,000. More than the original inheritance after interest and penalties. Part of it goes to paying back my law school loans. Part goes into savings for our future, maybe a house. I paused. And part of it goes to establishing a legal fund for other people whose families stole from them. Grandma wanted me to use this to build the life I wanted. Helping others do the same feels right. David leaned over and kissed me softly. "That's perfect. And very you. Very us," I corrected. "You've been in this with me from the beginning. The Chen Family Legal Fund for victims of family financial abuse. Margaret can handle the accounting." He laughed, surprised and delighted. "She'll love that. Fair warning, she'll probably want to expand it into a full nonprofit within 6 months." "Good. Let her." I felt something settle in my chest. Something that might have been peace. I spent 29 years being told I didn't matter. Now I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving that wrong. For me, and for everyone else who's been made invisible by the people who were supposed to love them. That night, I slept without nightmares for the first time in months. No dreams of science fairs or graduation ceremonies where I stood alone. No visions of 7-year-old me desperately trying to be good enough. Just peaceful darkness and David's steady breathing beside me. Justice had been served. The money would be returned. My parents would spend years in prison understanding the consequences of their choices. And I was free to build the life Grandma Helen had wanted for me. Not despite my family, but independent of them. Not defined by their neglect, but empowered by my own strength. The disappointment of a daughter had become the architect of her own justice. And that was worth more than any inheritance could ever be. 6 months after the trial, I stood in the conference room of Chen & Morgan Legal Services, watching Margaret direct the volunteer attorneys with the precision of a general commanding troops. Our nonprofit had officially launched 3 months ago with funding from my restitution payment, and we'd already helped 43 people file cases against family members who'd stolen inheritances. "Rachel, you need to see this," David called from his corner office. He'd left his engineering job to become our technology director, building a database to track patterns in family financial abuse. "We just got an inquiry from someone in Oregon whose parents did exactly what yours did, down to the offshore accounts." I crossed to his desk reading the email. The details were eerily similar. Deceased grandparents' trust, parents claiming it never existed, sudden lifestyle improvements for a favored sibling. "Send it to Margaret for the financial review. If it checks out, we'll take the case." My phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. "1 year sober today. Therapy is helping. Coffee sometime?" I'd been getting these periodic updates for months. Small milestones in her journey to becoming someone real, someone separate from our parents' expectations. I hadn't responded to most of them, wasn't ready for that relationship yet. But today I typed back, "Congratulations, I'm proud of you. Coffee next month?" Her response came immediately. "Yes. Thank you. I'll keep working. I want to be the sister you deserved." "You okay?" David asked, reading my expression. "Yeah." I pocketed my phone, just thinking about redemption, about whether people can really change. Some can. If they want it badly enough. If they do the work. He pulled up another case file. "Your father's appeal was denied, by the way. Margaret got the notification this morning." I felt nothing at that news. No satisfaction, no sadness, just neutral acceptance. My father would serve his full 8 years. My mother was eligible for parole in 2 months, but based on her complete lack of remorse in psychological evaluations, it seemed unlikely she'd get it. They'd destroyed everything they'd built, their business, their reputation, their family, through their own choices. And unlike the people we were helping at the nonprofit, they still didn't understand what they'd done wrong. "Miss Morgan?" A young woman appeared in the doorway clutching a folder. "Jessica Martinez, one of our first clients. I wanted to thank you. In person. The settlement came through. My parents agreed to full restitution plus damages. I can finally pay for medical school." I smiled at her. "You did the hard work, Jessica. We just provided the legal framework. You gave me permission to fight back." She corrected. "You showed me that standing up to family who hurt you isn't betrayal. It's self-preservation." She hugged the folder to her chest. "I'm going to pay it forward. First year of medical school, I'm focusing on family trauma. Because of you. After she left, I stood at the window overlooking downtown Austin. The same view from the courthouse, from the bridge where David and I had stopped that night, but everything had changed. I'd changed. The disappointment of a daughter had become a person with agency, with power, with purpose. The invisible girl at the science fair had become someone who helped other invisible people be seen. My phone rang. Thomas Chen, calling from his fishing cabin in Colorado where he'd retired last month. Just wanted to check in. How's the nonprofit going? We're drowning in cases, I admitted. Apparently, family financial abuse is way more common than anyone realized. That's because people like your parents are good at hiding it, good at making their victims feel crazy for questioning them. He paused. I'm proud of you, Rachel. What you've built from that pain is remarkable. After hanging up, I found David in our shared office, working on the database updates. He looked up and smiled. That same steady presence that had anchored me through the worst of it. Want to go home? He asked. It's almost 6. Home. I tested the word. Our house now, bought with part of the restitution money. A small craftsman in Hyde Park with a garden where I was learning to grow tomatoes and a front porch where we drank coffee on Sunday mornings. A space that was ours, built on honesty and trust and actual love. Not the sterile mansion where I'd spent my childhood being invisible. Not the trophy house my parents had bought with stolen money. Just a real home with a man who saw me, in a life I'd built myself. Yeah, I said, closing my laptop. Let's go home. On the drive back, we passed the Lakeside Country Club where Victoria's wedding had happened, the place where I'd finally stopped being invisible, where I'd claimed my own narrative, where everything had begun to change. Do you regret it? David asked, following my gaze. Any of it? I thought about my father in prison, still raging about ungrateful daughters, about my mother's upcoming parole hearing where she'd probably claim to be the real victim, about Victoria's slow, painful journey toward actual personhood, about the family I'd lost that had never really been a family at all. No, the answer came easily, honestly. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that they made choices that led to this. But standing up for myself, seeking justice, building something meaningful from the damage, I shook my head. That I'll never regret. At a red light, David reached for my hand. For the record, I'm grateful they were terrible parents. Because their failure created you, and you're extraordinary. I laughed, surprised and delighted. That's a deeply twisted way to look at it. Maybe, but it's true. The light changed and he drove on. You're not who you are despite them. You're who you are because you refuse to let them define you. That's different. In our driveway, I paused before getting out of the car. Grandma Helen once told me when I was maybe 10 that strength isn't about never falling. It's about standing back up and choosing yourself, even when nobody else will. I looked at the house we'd built together, this life we were creating. I think she was preparing me, giving me the tools to survive them. She succeeded. David kissed my forehead. Come on, I'm making dinner, you're picking the movie, and we're not talking about lawsuits or family dysfunction for at least 4 hours. Deal. Inside, our home smelled like David's attempt at homemade pasta sauce and the lavender candles I'd bought last week. Photos covered the walls, but they were different from the staged family portraits in my parents' house. These were real moments. David and me on our courthouse wedding day, the Chen family at our housewarming party, Margaret and me cutting the ribbon at the nonprofit opening. No photos of my parents, no images of Victoria's destroyed wedding, just documentation of the family I'd chosen and the life I'd built from the ruins of the one I'd been given. My phone buzzed one more time. An email from the prosecutor's office. Thought you'd want to know. Robert Morgan was denied parole. He became combative during the hearing, claimed the whole thing was a conspiracy against him. Parole board wasn't impressed. He'll serve the full 8 years. I forwarded it to David without comment, then turned off my phone completely. My father could spend the next 8 years insisting he was the victim, that I'd betrayed him, that he'd done nothing wrong. It didn't matter. The law had spoken. The jury had decided. Justice had been served. And I had a life to live that had nothing to do with him anymore. Rachel? David called from the kitchen. Movie's queued up, food's almost ready, you coming? Yeah, I called back, leaving my phone on the entry table. I'm coming. 29 years I'd waited to matter. 29 years I'd hoped they'd see me, value me, choose me. I'd stopped waiting, stopped hoping. And in doing so, I'd found something better than their approval. I'd found myself. And that, Grandma Helen would have said, was worth more than any inheritance, any family, any amount of money. That was freedom.